So let's break down a psychological analysis of Donald Trump. This is all based on a really deep dive into court records, sworn testimony, and decades of reporting. And I want to be super clear about one thing right up front. Explaining is not excusing. The whole point here is to understand a pattern.
Okay, so to really get this pattern, you gotta start with the numbers. According to the Washington Post fact-checking project, this is the number of documented false or misleading claims he made during his 4 years in office. Over 30,000. Think about that for a second. That's an average of about 20 a day, every single day for 4 years straight.
And then there's this number, 34. The number of felony convictions in the Manhattan trial back in May of 2024. Now, what's so revealing here isn't just the number, it's the response. I mean, for most people, that would be devastating, right? The response here? Total defiance.
And that's really the big question we're tackling here. Is all of this, the claims, the legal battles, the constant swirl of controversy, is it all just random chaos? Or, as the source material argues, is it the output of a predictable, almost hard-coded system? A pattern that, once you see it, you kind of can't unsee it.
So the central idea from the source material is that what we're seeing isn't random at all. It's the consistent output of a deeply ingrained psychological operating system. You know, think of it like computer code that was written decades ago, and it's just been running the same programs over and over ever since, no matter what the situation is. Okay, so what do you call this operating system? Well, the clinical term that psychologists like Dr. John Gartner have pointed to is malignant narcissism. Now, this idea was first cooked up by the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm to describe the most dangerous kinds of leaders. It's basically a toxic cocktail of 4 key ingredients: narcissism, antisocial behavior, paranoia, and sadism. And this operating system, it runs a very specific playbook, like clockwork, anytime it feels threatened, which is, pretty much all the time. The source material lays it out as a 4-step sequence. First up, denial. It never happened. It's fake news. Then deflection. Yeah, but what about them? The real scandal is. Next up, attack. Go after the source, discredit them, try to destroy them. And finally, if the loss is just too big to deny, you reframe it as some kind of secret victory. So that's the big question, right? How does a system like this get written in the first place? Well, the analysis traces it all the way back to a series of really powerful experiences in his childhood and early adulthood that essentially hardwired this worldview into him. Let's take a look at how that code was actually written. The source really zeroes in on 3 crucial moments that shaped this whole operating system. First, when he was just 2.5, his mother had a near-fatal hemorrhage. She was gone for about a year, which created this really deep sense of abandonment. Second, when he was 13, he was sent to the New York Military Academy, which he saw as a punishment, and it just reinforced this idea that he was always under attack. And third, at age 27, he meets this notoriously ruthless lawyer, Roy Cohn, who basically gave him a blueprint for how to fight. You could say the very first programmer of this code was his own father, Fred Trump. And his core lesson, it was brutally simple. The world is a jungle, and in that jungle, there are only 2 types of people, killers and losers. So his command to his son was simple: be a killer, don't be a loser. And that binary, zero-sum worldview became the foundation for everything. And this really shows you the next layer of that code. So if Fred Trump wrote the foundation, Roy Cohn came along and basically provided the user interface, the real-world application of that worldview. Cohn's playbook, which Trump was apparently totally taken by, was simple and had no morals. Never admit you're wrong. Attack, attack, and attack again. And if you get caught, just deny everything and fight back even harder. That became his strategy for life. Okay, so once that operating system was up and running, it was deployed in business and in the media to build this powerful and, according to the source material, completely false public image. It was all about creating a myth of incredible success, even when the reality on the ground was, well, pretty different. And this slide just lays out the 2 different stories perfectly. On one hand, you have the myth, the self-made billionaire who got a small loan of $1 million. But then you have the reality, which was documented in a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation by the New York Times. At least $413 million that was transferred from his father's empire, a lot of it through tax fraud. The myth was the master dealmaker. The reality included 6 corporate bankruptcies. So how do you square that circle? How do you bridge that massive gap between the myth and the reality? Well, you use this phrase, which was actually invented by the ghostwriter Tony Schwartz for The Art of the Deal, truthful hyperbole. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? But it was the perfect cover for what Schwartz later admitted was just pathological lying. It was a way to sell fiction as some kind of higher truth. And then, reality TV just poured gasoline on the whole thing. The source argues that The Apprentice was literally his resurrection. See, after all his casino bankruptcies, he was seen more as an entertainer than a serious businessman. But in the editing room, they could take his rambling, all-over-the-place conversations and slice them up into these sharp, decisive commands. Television literally created the character of a brilliant CEO.
All right, so this all leads to a pretty sobering conclusion from the source material. The argument is that some of these core psychological traits, they aren't bugs in the system that you can just patch or fix. Nope, they're the load-bearing walls. They are permanent structural features of his character.
The analysis really zeroes in on 3 core traits that are seen as completely unchangeable. First, an incapacity for personal growth. Why? Because to grow, you have to admit you made a mistake. And for this system, that's impossible. Second, a profound lack of empathy, a neurological inability, really, to feel what other people are feeling. And third, this all-consuming need to dominate, the need to win and humiliate your opponent in every single interaction.
And honestly, nothing makes this point about a lack of personal growth better than his own words. He actually said this in an interview, and the source presents it as a confession that's kind of disguised as a brag. What some people might see as consistency, this psychological analysis sees as a developmental freeze, a character that got locked in place way back in early childhood.
And that brings us right back to where we started. According to this psychological portrait, these patterns we see aren't choices being made day to day. They're the inevitable output of a system that was coded a long, long time ago. The source leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Understanding that system isn't about excusing the behavior, it's about predicting it. And when you're facing a predictable pattern, understanding it might just be the key to survival.